There are wounds that don't bleed, but they echo. Some pain doesn't scream, it sits quietly, asking only to be felt. There is a kind of pain that does not scream. It does not knock on the door of your chest demanding to be heard. It sits there quietly, breathing with you, almost invisible but heavier than anything you've ever carried. That is the silent weight of pain. It is the ache that hides behind the words, "I'm okay." It's the tremor in the smile that seems convincing, the sigh between sentences that no one else hears. You wake up with it, you sleep beside it, and you carry it into every conversation like a shadow that won't let go. There are people who think pain is only real when it's loud. They think if you are not crying, you must be fine. But some of the deepest hurts are the ones that have no sound. They don't crash, they don't explode, they don't make a scene. They settle into the corners of your soul and stay there, teaching you how to function while falling apart. They turn your laughter into a practiced act and your stillness into survival. The silent kind of pain is different. It has patience. It doesn't rush to announce itself. It stays long after the storm has passed, long after the apologies, long after the world has moved on. You can be sitting in a room full of people who love you and still feel like you're sitting underwater, where every word sounds distant, every heartbeat muffled. You nod, you smile, you respond, but you are not really there. That's how the silent weight of pain moves. It does not demand attention, but it takes everything from you quietly. You learn to carry it like a secret. You don't talk about it because you've learned that not everyone knows how to hold pain gently. Some people turn it into gossip, some turn it into pity, and some pretend not to hear it at all. So you carry it alone, convincing yourself that silence is safer, and maybe it is. Because when you finally find the courage to speak, you realize how small your words sound compared to the enormity of what you feel. Words can't wrap around certain wounds. Language begins to fail where emotion runs too deep. The world teaches us to explain ourselves, to give our pain a story. But how do you describe a feeling that doesn't have shape or reason? How do you describe the ache of missing something you can't even name? Sometimes there's no event to point to, no heartbreak to quote. Sometimes the pain just lives there, without origin, without closure, without end. It's the kind that comes from seeing too much, from feeling too deeply, from loving too honestly, and yet even in its silence, pain speaks. It changes the way you move, the way you see others, the way you breathe. You start noticing the quiet in other people too, the way their eyes look away too quickly, the way their laughter feels slightly offbeat. You begin to understand that everyone is carrying something they don't talk about. The woman at the grocery store, the friend who seems fine, the stranger who smiles too easily, each of them holds a quiet ache. Pain has many languages, and silence is one of them. There are nights when the weight of it becomes too much to hold. You lie awake, staring into the dark, trying to find where it hurts the most. But pain like this has no single location. It spreads itself evenly through your soul. It sits in your chest, but it also hums in your bones. It lingers in your memory, but it also hides in the way you avoid certain songs, certain streets, certain faces. It is both everywhere and nowhere. People tell you to let it go, but they don't understand that you can't let go of something that has become part of you. The silent weight of pain molds itself into your being. It changes your rhythm, your reactions, even your faith. It doesn't mean you are broken. It means you are human enough to feel what others run from. It means your heart has depth. It means your soul remembers what love, loss, and longing really mean. The hardest part about silent pain is that it doesn't always show up as tears. It often disguises itself as calm. You become so good at pretending peace that even you start to believe it. You say you're fine because that's what the world prefers to hear. But inside, you are carrying years of unspoken words, unanswered prayers, and unfinished healing. You have trained yourself to keep walking even when your knees want to give out. That's what silent pain does. It teaches endurance. It turns survival into an art form. And somehow, amid all this weight, there is still a strange kind of grace, because silence teaches you to listen to yourself, to others, to the world. You begin to recognize the sound of your own soul breathing. You find moments of stillness that don't demand explanation. You begin to see beauty even in broken places. Pain humbles you. It strips away illusions. It makes you softer in ways the world doesn't always notice. There will be days when the silence feels unbearable, when every breath feels like lifting a mountain. On those days, remind yourself that even silence is a language of survival. Every heartbeat says, I am still here. Every breath says, I am still fighting. You may not have words for your pain, but you have the strength to live through it, and that is its own kind of poetry. Because the truth is, not every wound needs an audience. Not every ache needs a witness. Some pains are private prayers whispered only between you and the universe. They are not meant to be spoken, only endured, only transformed. You may never find the words to explain what you've been through, and that's okay. Some pain doesn't need to be explained. It just needs to be respected. The silent weight of pain does not make you weak. It means you've learned how to keep going without applause, how to heal without attention, how to stand without being understood. It means you've carried darkness and still chosen to see light. It means that somewhere inside you, despite everything, there is still hope. And that hope, small, flickering, almost invisible, is what keeps you alive. It whispers in the quietest moments, "You are not done yet." It holds your hand when no one else does. It reminds you that even silence can be sacred, that even pain can be purposeful, and that even the heaviest heart still beats for something beautiful. We live in a world that glorifies expression. Everywhere you turn, there's a voice demanding to be heard, a story waiting to be told, a caption fighting to sound profound. We are taught from a young age that speaking is strength, that sharing is healing, that silence is a kind of failure. But there is a misunderstanding buried deep in that belief, the idea that everything felt must be spoken, that every truth must be shared, that every emotion must have an audience. Some feelings are too raw, too sacred, too unfinished to be wrapped in language. The misunderstanding of expression lies in confusing noise with honesty, words with wisdom, and exposure with healing. There are things the heart knows that the mouth cannot say. The human experience is not meant to be narrated at every turn. Some moments are meant to be lived, not explained. Yet the world pressures us to find words, even when the soul is still learning what it feels. We are told that silence means repression, that quiet means weakness. But there is a kind of dignity in restraint. Not every emotion needs translation, because not all truths can survive the weight of words. When people say, "Speak your truth," they often forget that truth itself is alive. It moves, it changes, it breathes. What was true yesterday may not be true tomorrow. The truth you speak in the middle of pain may sound different once the pain has softened. Sometimes we rush to express before we have understood, and in doing so, we reduce what was meant to grow in silence. We force clarity before healing has had a chance to shape itself. In that rush, we mistake expression for relief and talking for transformation. But healing is not found in the telling. It is found in the understanding that often follows long after the words have faded. Expression, when misunderstood, becomes a performance. We start performing our pain instead of processing it. We learn to package our emotions into neatly shaped sentences because the world responds better to stories than to silence. We decorate our wounds with metaphors and call it art, but deep down, we know that some parts of us still ache in places language cannot reach. The misunderstanding of expression makes us believe that what isn't shared doesn't exist, that pain without an audience is pain without purpose. But there is purpose in privacy. There is power in keeping something sacred enough not to be spoken. Social spaces have made confession a kind of currency. Everyone is expected to narrate their struggles, to share every piece of their healing as proof of progress. We have mistaken visibility for vulnerability, as if saying something publicly means you've made peace with it. But there's a difference between expression that liberates and expression that exposes. One frees you, the other drains you. The truth is, you don't owe the world your pain in words. You don't have to translate your heart just to make others comfortable with your silence. Some feelings are not ready to be expressed because they are still forming. They need quiet to become clear. They need solitude to soften their edges. When we speak too soon, we often misrepresent what we feel. We take something sacred and hand it to the world before we even know what it means to us. That is how expression becomes misunderstanding, when it's used as escape instead of reflection, when words become a substitute for feeling rather than a bridge toward healing. There are things the soul communicates better without sound. A deep breath, a long stare, a quiet walk in the dark, all of these carry more truth than the loudest speech. There are nights when silence says more than an essay could. There are moments when tears explain what language never could. And there are seasons in life when the most powerful expression is simply to endure, to sit in your truth without dressing it in words. To express is to translate the inner world into something visible. But translation always loses something. Words can only hold so much. They are containers, and sometimes what you feel cannot fit inside. You can describe the color of the sky, but not the feeling it gives you. You can tell someone you miss them, but not the way your chest tightens when you see their name. That's the failure of expression. It can only point toward the truth, never fully hold it. The misunderstanding of expression also makes us judge others unfairly. We assume that those who speak passionately are brave and those who stay silent are afraid. But some of the strongest souls are quiet. Their strength lies not in what they say, but in what they choose not to say. They have learned that not every truth deserves exposure, that some emotions gain their meaning only in silence. They have learned that privacy can be a form of peace. There are times when expression itself becomes exhausting. When you've told your story too many times and it begins to sound like someone else's. When the retelling stops healing and starts reopening. When the words no longer bring comfort but only repetition. In those moments, silence becomes sanctuary. It is not withdrawal, it is recovery. It is the heart saying, I need to breathe without explaining myself. True expression is not in how loudly you speak, but in how honestly you feel. It's not about being heard, it's about being real, with yourself first. Sometimes that means talking, sometimes that means writing, and sometimes that means saying nothing at all. The misunderstanding of expression is thinking that we always owe the world our voice. But there are seasons where silence is the truest sound you can make. The beauty of being human is that we contain multitudes. Thoughts will never voice, feelings will never name, memories will never retell. They live quietly inside us, shaping us more deeply than anything we could ever say out loud. Expression may reveal who we are to others, but silence reveals who we are to ourselves. So perhaps the point is not to express everything, but to know what deserves expression and what deserves quiet honor. The world may never understand that difference, but your soul will. Because silence is not absence, it's awareness. It's the moment when you realize that you don't need to speak to exist. You don't need to explain to heal, and you don't need to be loud to be heard by the heart that truly listens. Expression is powerful, yes, but not all truths need translation. Some truths are too sacred to be spoken, too delicate to be handled by words, too vast to fit into human language. The misunderstanding of expression is forgetting that there is wisdom in restraint, that silence too can be eloquent, and that sometimes the most honest voice we have is the one that never makes a sound. There are moments in life when words lose their power, when language feels too small to hold what the heart carries. In those moments, silence steps forward, not as emptiness, but as something holy. Silence has a texture, a rhythm, a heartbeat. It speaks in ways words never can. It holds space for the things that can't be spoken and offers comfort to what can't be explained. There is a sacredness in silence, a stillness that doesn't ask to be filled, only honored. We live in a world that moves fast and speaks loudly. Every thought is shared, every feeling is posted, every moment narrated. We are surrounded by sound, yet starving for meaning. In all this noise, silence becomes rare, and because it's rare, it becomes sacred. It is in silence that truth breathes. It is in silence that we finally hear the voice beneath our own, the voice of the heart, the whisper of the soul. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of awareness. When you allow yourself to be still, you begin to notice what you've been running from. The mind softens, the spirit steadies, and the heart begins to speak in its own quiet language. That is the miracle of silence. It doesn't demand attention, yet it transforms everything it touches. It doesn't raise its voice, yet it heals wounds words never could. There are people who fear silence because it reveals too much. In silence, the masks fall away. You hear your doubts, your memories, your longings. You face the truth you've been avoiding, but that confrontation is sacred too. Silence doesn't come to punish, it comes to cleanse. It is the space where the heart meets itself without interruption, where the soul remembers what it was before the world told it who to be. In silence, there is intimacy. You begin to connect not just with yourself, but with something larger, the divine, the universe, creation, whatever name you give it, speaks most clearly in the absence of noise. The sun rises in silence. The ocean breathes without applause. The stars move without announcement. All of nature understands that silence is the language of the sacred. It is humans who forgot. We often mistake silence for loneliness, but they are not the same. Loneliness is the hunger for connection, while silence is the feast. In silence, you discover that you are never truly alone. You are surrounded by presence, by your own breath, by your thoughts, by unseen forces that hold you even when you cannot see them. When you sit quietly, you start to sense the invisible. Your ancestors, your dreams, your resilience. Silence becomes a bridge between what was and what will be. The sacredness of silence also lives in the spaces between words. In a conversation, it's the pause that lets meaning settle. In music, it's the rest that gives the note its power. In love, it's the quiet understanding that needs no explanation. Silence does not weaken expression, it completes it. Without silence, everything becomes noise. Without stillness, everything becomes chaos. When you are grieving, silence becomes your companion. It holds your pain without judgment, without demand. It does not rush your healing or tell you to move on. It simply sits beside you until you are ready to rise again. That is the sacred mercy of silence. It stays. It doesn't try to fix. It doesn't try to explain. It just bears witness. Sometimes the purest form of love is the one that listens without speaking. The world often tells us that silence is awkward, that it needs to be filled. But true strength is learning to sit inside it without fear, to breathe without words, to exist without performance. In that space, you find clarity. You realize that the things you once chased were distractions, that the peace you were searching for was always waiting behind the noise. There are kinds of healing that only silence can bring. When your mind is loud with overthinking, silence teaches simplicity. When your heart is heavy with memories, silence teaches surrender. When your spirit is tired from pretending, silence gives permission to rest. You learn that doing nothing can be the most powerful act of all, that being still can be the greatest movement toward yourself. Silence is not empty. It is full of answers waiting to be heard. It is the pause before understanding, the breath before forgiveness, the calm before truth arrives. When you sit long enough in silence, you begin to notice the small things, the sound of your breath, the rhythm of your heartbeat, the hum of life beneath everything. You realize that existence itself is miraculous, that you are part of something vast and ancient. In relationships, silence can be sacred too, the kind shared between two souls who no longer need words to understand each other, the kind that wraps around you like safety. When someone can sit beside you in quiet and you still feel seen, that is love. Because silence reveals authenticity. It removes pretense. It shows who we are when the world stops asking us to perform. But silence is not always gentle. Sometimes it asks hard questions. Sometimes it confronts the parts of you that are loud with denial. It pulls you toward the truths you've buried. It shows you your wounds, your regrets, your unfinished lessons. Yet even that is sacred, because silence doesn't destroy, it purifies. It burns away illusions until only truth remains. And truth, even when painful, is freedom. To sit in silence is to trust that you don't need to fill every space to be worthy. You don't need constant sound to prove you exist. You don't need to explain your journey to make it meaningful. In silence, you are already enough. You are already whole. You realize that peace isn't something to be found. It's something you uncover beneath the noise of living. The sacredness of silence lives in every pause we take to remember who we are. It lives in prayer, in meditation, in the moments we stand before the sunrise and simply watch. It lives in the space between loss and acceptance, between confusion and clarity, between chaos and calm. It is there, waiting, patient and timeless, asking for nothing but presence. The most powerful truths are not shouted, they are whispered through silence. And when you learn to listen to that whisper, you begin to live differently. You stop chasing validation. You stop forcing understanding. You begin to trust the stillness inside you. Silence becomes your teacher, your healer, your mirror, because when all else fades, when the world grows quiet, when words no longer make sense, it is silence that remains. It is silence that holds you. It is silence that reminds you that everything sacred has always spoken softly. There are moments when language fails us, when words, once trusted to carry truth, suddenly feel too small, too fragile, too shallow. You reach for them and they fall apart before they reach your lips. That is when words betray. They were supposed to protect, to explain, to release, but instead they twist, they weaken, they crumble under the weight of what you're trying to say. There is a kind of pain, a kind of love, a kind of loss that refuses to fit inside a sentence. Words, for all their beauty, can sometimes be a cage for feelings that were meant to fly free. When you are hurt, people tell you to talk about it. You'll feel better if you say it out loud, they say. But what happens when speaking only makes it worse? When the moment you name your sorrow, it begins to sound less true, less sacred? Some emotions lose their power when spoken. Some memories lose their magic when told. There are truths that live better in silence because the second they meet language, they are reduced, altered, reshaped into something smaller than they really are. That is the betrayal of words. They promise to deliver your truth, but they often deliver only the shadow of it. Words can be sharp when they're meant to soothe. They can cut when all you wanted was to be understood. Sometimes you speak from the heart, but what reaches the other person is something else, distorted, misheard, or taken apart. And suddenly what was once tender becomes tense. What was once intimate becomes distant. That is the quiet tragedy of communication. Between the feeling and the phrase, something is always lost. The heart speaks in music, but words translate it into math. You can spend hours searching for the right thing to say, but there are moments when no right words exist. The truth you feel cannot be carried by syllables. It is too vast, too alive, too aching. You stand there, tongue heavy, heart full, and nothing that comes out sounds real enough. You end up speaking in fragments, hoping the other person hears what you meant, not just what you said. But that hope rarely lands. Words betray, not because they are empty, but because they are limited. They were never built to hold the infinity of emotion. Think of the times you've said, "I'm fine," when you weren't. Think of the times you've said, "It's okay," when it wasn't. Those words become armor, shields that hide what trembles beneath. But sometimes they also become lies we tell ourselves. Words can protect, yes, but they can also imprison. When you say you're fine enough times, you start believing it. You begin to speak your own denial until it sounds like truth. That is another kind of betrayal, the one where language turns against the soul that speaks it. There is a moment, too, when words come too late. You find them only after the person you needed to say them to is gone. You rehearse the conversations in your head, every sentence you wish you had spoken, every apology that never found its way out. But time does not wait for the right words. And sometimes silence takes their place forever. Words can betray by arriving too soon or too late, never when they're truly needed. In love, words are both gift and gamble. They can build bridges or set them on fire. You can say, "I love you," and mean it with your whole being, yet somehow it sounds ordinary. Or you can stay silent and your eyes speak more truth than any confession could. Love at its deepest often outgrows language. It becomes something that can only be felt between breaths, between glances, between the spaces where words dare not go. And when we try to describe it, we only end up dimming its light. Words betray, too, in grief. People come to you trying to comfort, and their well-meant phrases land like stones. Everything happens for a reason. They're in a better place. You nod politely, but inside, your pain rages. Because those words, though kind, make something infinite sound tidy. They turn your heartbreak into a slogan, and in that moment, you realize how fragile language is in the face of loss. There are no words big enough to hold the absence of someone you love. There are only silences, breaths, and the quiet throb of memory. Sometimes words betray because we use them to fill the quiet instead of to honor it. We rush to explain what doesn't need explanation. We rush to comfort when comfort requires presence, not poetry. There are moments when the truest expression is not a sentence, but a shared silence. Yet we speak anyway because silence scares us. We think that if we can name the pain, we can control it. But pain doesn't obey language. It doesn't soften just because it has been described. We forget that words are symbols, not truth itself. They point toward meaning, but are not the meaning. When you say sunset, you are not holding the light in your hand. When you say forgive, the healing doesn't instantly arrive. When you say goodbye, it doesn't stop the ache that follows. Words are echoes of experience, not the experience itself. The misunderstanding comes when we start treating them as the real thing. Yet even knowing all this, we keep using them because words are the only tools we have. We shape them, polish them, push them to carry as much truth as they can, even when they spill most of it along the way. Maybe betrayal is part of their nature. Maybe that's what makes them human too. Imperfect, imprecise, always trying and never quite enough. There are times when you will wish you could speak your heart clearly, when you will stand in front of someone and feel your throat close around everything you mean to say. You will search for words and find only silence. But perhaps that silence is not failure. Perhaps it is truth's last protection. Some things are too sacred to be spoken. Some truths are too alive to be pinned down. When words betray, it is not always a curse. Sometimes it is mercy. Sometimes it is the universe protecting what must remain unspoken, because what can't be said often carries more power than what can. The things we cannot explain are often the ones that change us most deeply. They live in the spaces between words, in the pauses that hold everything words cannot. So you forgive the language for its betrayal. You stop demanding perfection from it. You let it stumble, you let it fail, and when it does, you let silence take over. Because sometimes silence does what words cannot. It holds the truth without trying to own it. It understands that the heart has its own voice, and it doesn't always need to speak to be heard. There are moments when words are not enough, when no sentence can carry what the heart is trying to say. In those moments, it is presence that speaks. Presence is the language that requires no translation. It is felt, not heard. It says, I am here without making a sound. It is the quiet assurance that someone is standing with you in your pain, not trying to fix it, not trying to explain it, just holding space for it. There is a purity in that kind of being, a truth deeper than anything spoken. That is the language of presence, and it speaks in silence, in warmth, in understanding eyes that do not need words to know. In a world so full of noise, we have forgotten the sacred power of simply being there. Everyone wants to respond, to advise, to fill the quiet with sentences, but presence asks for something else. It asks for stillness. It asks for attention that does not wander. It asks you to put down your need to speak and instead to feel. Because sometimes what a hurting soul needs most is not your wisdom, it's your witness. Not your answers, but your company. When someone sits beside you in silence while your world is breaking, they are saying something words never could. They are saying, your pain matters enough for me to stop everything and stay. That kind of presence carries a language older than speech. It's the language of touch, of breath, of closeness that asks for nothing. It reminds us that love doesn't always arrive with explanations. It arrives with stillness, with empathy, with the kind of patience that allows grief to breathe. Presence is not about doing, it's about being. We often think we need to say something meaningful to make a difference, but the truth is, meaning is already there in the act of showing up. Presence does not try to impress or perform. It does not need to be clever or eloquent. It just needs to be honest. The most profound comfort often comes from someone who says very little, but whose eyes say, you are not alone. There are times when words make the wound deeper. When someone is in pain, words can feel like noise, like intrusion. But presence is different. It doesn't disturb, it steadies. It doesn't demand a response, it gives permission to feel. When you hold someone's hand, when you sit with them through the silence, you are speaking in a divine language, the kind that the soul understands instantly. You're telling them you are seen, you are safe, you are not forgotten. We underestimate the power of our presence because we are so addicted to expression. We think silence means we've failed to comfort, when in truth, silence can be the greatest form of love. To be present is to surrender control, to stop trying to make things better, and instead to simply allow what is. That takes courage, because presence asks you to bear witness to pain without retreating. It asks you to sit inside someone else's sorrow without needing to escape. The language of presence is simple but sacred. It doesn't rush. It doesn't fill the air with words meant to soften the truth. It lets the truth exist exactly as it is. It honors the moment instead of managing it. There is grace in that stillness, the kind of grace that says, I don't have to fix you to love you. That message is worth more than 1,000 phrases of comfort, because love is not proven by the words we speak. It's revealed by the time we give. Presence also speaks to yourself. When you stop running from your own feelings, when you sit quietly with your fear or sadness without trying to numb it, you are practicing self-presence. You are telling yourself, I am here for me. It's one of the hardest kinds of love, the love that stays even when the heart is tired, even when the soul feels heavy. Most people run from their pain, but those who dare to stay and listen to it learn its language. They learn that pain, too, is a teacher, and presence is how you understand it. When life feels unbearable, it's not the perfect advice that saves you. It's the hand that doesn't let go, the friend who doesn't ask you to explain, the quiet room where you can finally breathe. That is the language of presence, unspoken, invisible, but more real than any conversation. It's the space between two people where honesty lives, where compassion grows, where healing begins without instruction. Presence has its own rhythm. It slows you down. It makes you listen, not to words, but to hearts. It's the way a mother sits beside her child in the middle of the night, saying nothing, just being there. It's the way lovers share a sunset without speaking, both feeling the same unspoken peace. It's the way a friend waits beside your hospital bed, not knowing what to say, but knowing they must stay anyway. All of these moments speak in the same language, the quiet certainty that love does not need to be loud to be real. We often confuse presence with proximity, but they are not the same. You can be near someone and still be absent. You can sit beside them and still be somewhere else in your mind. True presence requires attention. It asks you to arrive fully, to bring your heart, your patience, your stillness, to really see the person in front of you, to listen not only to their words, but to what they are not saying, to be so attuned that even silence becomes communication. The language of presence doesn't demand fluency, it demands sincerity. You don't have to know the right thing to say. You don't even have to say anything. You just have to be real. Authentic presence doesn't promise healing, it promises honesty. It tells the other person, I may not understand your pain, but I refuse to let you face it alone. There is a reason we remember those who stood beside us more than those who spoke to us. Words fade, but presence lingers. Long after conversations are forgotten, the feeling of being seen remains. You remember the embrace that didn't ask questions, the quiet companionship that gave your pain dignity. That is the timeless power of presence. It leaves an imprint beyond sound, a comfort that continues to speak even when the moment has passed. Presence is not something we do, it is something we allow. It's the stillness we bring to others and to ourselves. It's the deep breath we take before reacting, the pause before judgment, the openness before understanding. It's a language without words, yet it carries the truest message of all, that love is not about what you say, but how fully you show up. When you learn to speak that language, you begin to understand that silence is not empty, it's alive. It holds everything words can't, compassion, truth, and peace. And when you offer that to someone, your quiet, your time, your undivided heart, you become the voice they didn't know they needed to hear. Because presence says what words never can. You are not alone, and you never will be. Healing does not always come with answers. Sometimes it arrives quietly, without reason or rhythm. It does not announce itself, nor does it always make sense. One day you realize the ache isn't as sharp, the tears don't fall as often, and you can breathe again without that heaviness sitting on your chest. You may not know how or when it happened. Healing, real healing, is often beyond explanation. It does not follow the logic of time or the steps of reason. It unfolds in its own sacred way. There are pains that cannot be measured, wounds that no one can see. They live inside us, hidden behind smiles and strength. We want to explain them to make them neat and understandable, but the truth is the heart does not heal on command. It bends, it breaks, it mends in silence. Healing asks for patience when your spirit is tired, forgiveness when your pride is loud, and softness when your instinct is to harden. It is not a journey that can be mapped. It is a quiet returning to yourself. We often seek explanations because they make pain feel purposeful. If we can name the reason, we think we can control it. But some experiences will never offer that clarity. Sometimes life simply happens without fairness, without logic. And when it does, we stand in the rubble trying to understand what cannot be understood. Yet healing doesn't always wait for understanding. It begins in the small, almost invisible moments when you choose to keep going anyway, when you choose to smile even though it still hurts, when you wake up and say, "I'll try again." That is where healing begins, not in knowing why, but in deciding to live through the not knowing. There is a part of healing that asks you to surrender the need for explanation, to stop asking why me and start whispering, "Still me." Because even after everything that has been lost, something within you remains unbroken. That quiet, resilient part of you that has survived every ending, every disappointment, every grief, it is still here. Healing begins when you honor that part, when you choose to see survival as sacred, not accidental. Healing does not always mean you return to who you were before the pain. Sometimes it means becoming someone new, someone softer, wiser, quieter. Pain changes you, and healing allows you to meet the version of yourself that pain revealed, the one who knows what matters and what doesn't. The one who doesn't chase explanations because they've learned peace is found not in knowing, but in being. There are moments when you think you've healed, and then a song plays, a scent returns, or a place reminds you, and suddenly the ache is back. You may feel like you failed, like you've fallen backward, but that's not regression, it's remembrance. Healing isn't about erasing the pain, it's about learning to carry it differently. You no longer drown in it, you learn how to float above it. That's the beauty of healing beyond explanation. It's not perfection, it's transformation. You begin to understand that peace doesn't mean the pain never happened, it means it no longer controls you. Healing teaches you that pain and peace can exist in the same breath, that joy can rise from the same soil as sorrow. It's an unfolding, not a switch. It happens in the pauses between grief and gratitude, in the quiet moments when you realize you can laugh again without guilt. When we stop demanding answers from our pain, we start hearing what it's been trying to tell us all along. Sometimes the purpose of pain isn't to teach you something. It's simply to make you human, to soften the edges of your understanding, to remind you how fragile and sacred life really is. There's a tenderness that only comes from surviving what should have broken you. That tenderness is the evidence of healing, wordless, gentle, and true. Healing beyond explanation asks for faith. The kind that doesn't come from religion, but from experience. The faith that says, "I don't know how, but I will be okay." It's believing that life can bloom again, even in the soil of what was lost. That your heart can hold beauty even after it's been broken. That there is still meaning even when the story doesn't make sense. This kind of faith isn't loud or certain. It's quiet, like the sunrise after a long night. You don't question it, you simply witness it. Healing also means forgiving yourself for not knowing better before, for staying too long, for trusting too deeply, for breaking your own heart in the name of hope. Healing means seeing your younger self with compassion, not judgment. It's realizing that you did what you could with what you knew then, and that now, with gentler eyes and a stronger heart, you can choose differently. That's the silent victory of healing. It doesn't erase the past, but it redeems it. There's a beauty in not being able to explain your healing because it reminds you that something greater is at work, something unseen that moves through your pain and transforms it without permission or pattern. Call it grace, call it love, call it time. It doesn't matter what name you give it. What matters is that it moves through you, that it restores what was lost in ways you never expected. Healing beyond explanation is the soul's quiet agreement with life to keep trusting even when you can't trace the reason. And maybe that's the point. Maybe healing was never meant to be explained, only experienced. Because to explain it would be to limit it. And healing is too vast for that. It's a mystery, a mercy, a slow and sacred awakening. It comes when you stop chasing closure and start embracing presence. When you stop asking for a reason and start living in the moment that's in front of you. You will know you are healing when you can look at your pain and no longer wish it away. When you can see the scar and feel gratitude instead of resentment. When you realize that your softness is not your weakness, it is your strength. Healing teaches you to live with an open heart, even after it's been broken. It teaches you that endings can be beginnings in disguise, and that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that never needed to be explained. So let it be unspoken, let it be mysterious. Let your healing be the quiet proof that life can begin again, even after the worst of storms. You may never find the words to explain how you survived, and that's okay. The miracle is not in the telling, it's in the living. And one day, when someone looks into your eyes and sees peace where there once was pain, they'll understand what you cannot put into words, that healing is real, even when it cannot be explained. There is a quiet kind of strength that lives in the spaces between words. It does not shout, it does not demand to be heard, yet it carries more truth than most conversations ever will. The strength of the unsaid lies in restraint, in knowing that silence can hold what speech cannot. There are feelings too sacred, too complex, too raw to be dressed in sentences. And so we let them live in silence where they remain pure, unedited, whole. We live in a world obsessed with expression, where everything must be explained, shared, justified. But not everything needs to be spoken. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life are the ones we do not narrate. The way someone's hand trembles before letting go, the quiet between two people who love each other but know they must part. The moment a tear falls, not out of weakness, but out of acceptance. Words might try to capture these moments, but they often fail. Because the language of the heart is not made of syllables, it is made of presence, of feeling, of silence. There is strength in the unsaid because it protects what words can destroy. Once something is spoken, it becomes smaller, confined by language. But in silence, it remains infinite. Think of grief, the kind that breaks you open from the inside. People will ask how you are. They will want you to speak it aloud. But how do you describe something that changed your very being? So you stay quiet, and in that quiet, you are honest. That is not avoidance, it is reverence. The heart knows that some truths lose their sacredness when exposed to sound. The unsaid also holds dignity. It is the pause between reaction and wisdom. It's the moment you could lash out, explain, defend, but you choose not to. You choose peace over pride. You let silence speak for you. That silence is not emptiness. It is maturity. It says, I know who I am, and I do not need to prove it. The unsaid can be the armor of the calm, the sanctuary of the strong, because when you understand the power of silence, you no longer rush to fill it. You learn that stillness is not absence, it is control. Sometimes silence is love's last act of kindness. There are truths that, if spoken, would break what little remains. So you hold them inside, not because you are afraid, but because you care. You understand that love is not always in the saying, it's often in the protecting. The unsaid becomes a gift, a boundary, a soft way of letting go without inflicting more pain. It is strength disguised as gentleness. There are moments when silence carries 1,000 unspoken words. A look, a sigh, a heartbeat that slows when a name is mentioned. Those moments are powerful because they remind us that communication is not limited to speech. The eyes, the breath, the presence, all of these speak too. They say what the mouth cannot. In the unsaid lives the poetry of truth, stripped of decoration, untouched by misunderstanding. There is also courage in holding back. It takes bravery not to explain yourself in a world that demands explanations. It takes discipline not to speak when anger burns in your chest. The unsaid is not suppression, it is awareness. It's the realization that not every feeling deserves a stage, that sometimes silence can heal faster than any apology. We are often taught that expression equals freedom, but sometimes restraint is the real liberation. The unsaid is where understanding grows. When words stop, listening begins. Deep, quiet listening, not to someone else, but to yourself. You start to hear your intuition, your truth, your boundaries. You realize that silence isn't empty. It's full of answers that words often blur. In that space, you meet yourself again. You learn that strength isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it looks like a deep breath instead of a response. Sometimes it looks like walking away instead of explaining why. The strength of the unsaid is not coldness, it's grace. It's the understanding that words, once released, cannot be taken back. So you hold them, you weigh them, and sometimes you choose not to send them into the world. That is not weakness, that is wisdom. The kind of wisdom that comes from being broken and rebuilt enough times to know that peace is too precious to waste on unnecessary speech. In relationships, the unsaid can build or break. It can be the comfort of shared silence where two souls understand each other without needing words, or it can be the distance that grows when fear silences truth. The difference lies in intention. Silence born from fear imprisons, but silence born from love frees. It gives space for reflection, for respect, for the kind of understanding that does not need translation. When two hearts can sit together and say nothing and still feel connected, that is a sacred strength. There are things we never say because we know the world will not understand them. Private hopes, hidden griefs, quiet forgivenesses. We keep them inside, and though they may feel heavy, they shape us. They make us more tender, more compassionate. The unsaid refines the soul. It teaches patience, empathy, humility. It reminds us that not everything real can be revealed. Some truths are meant to be lived, not spoken. We often underestimate the healing that silence brings. When words are too sharp, too clumsy, silence steps in and holds the wound gently. It doesn't demand to be understood, it simply allows space for breath. Sometimes the unsaid is what saves us. It gives the heart time to soften, the mind time to settle. It keeps us from saying things we cannot unsay, from acting on emotions that are temporary. It is the pause that protects us from regret. There is a quiet nobility in choosing the unsaid. It's the decision to rise above the noise, to trust that your truth does not need validation. It's the understanding that not everyone deserves access to your depths. When you choose to remain silent, You reclaim your power. You stop giving your peace away for the sake of being understood. The unsaid becomes your sanctuary, a place where your truth can rest without distortion. In time, you realize that silence is not the absence of voice. It is the presence of understanding. It is the knowing that truth does not need to shout to exist. The strongest souls are not those who always speak their minds, but those who can sit with their truth in stillness. They carry a calm that cannot be broken because it is built on the foundation of what is known but never spoken. The strength of the unsaid lives in that sacred space between what could be said and what is chosen to be kept. It lives in restraint, in wisdom, in quiet love. It is the courage to let silence carry your meaning, to trust that those who are meant to understand you will feel it, even if no words are spoken, because some truths, the deepest ones, are not meant to be told. They are meant to be felt. And in that feeling, beyond the reach of language, lies the purest form of strength, the strength of the unsaid. So tonight, if silence is all you have, let it be enough. Let it be your prayer, your poem, your promise to heal. Remember, some of the strongest souls are not the ones who can explain their pain, but the ones who can survive it without saying a single word.